Hello there, and welcome to another Pondering in the Psalms. And today we're taking a second look at Psalm 68. In the introduction to this psalm, in our last study, I drew your attention to the different names of God that are revealed to us in this psalm. And it's a reminder to us that God is the very center of and the focus of everything in this psalm. It is, in the strictest sense of the word, a profoundly theological psalm. But now we're going to look at the psalm as a whole, and we're going to do so in two sessions, because the psalm neatly and clearly falls into two sections. You have verses 1 to 18, and then you have verses 19 to 35. And the big difference between the two is this: if you read through the first section, 1 to 18, almost all the verbs are in the past tense. It's all about what God has done in the past, what he has been to his people. From verse 19 onwards, it's all in the present or the future tense. It's what God will be and is to his people. And of course, the future is based on God's experience, God's people's experience of God in the past. So today we're going to look at verses 1 to 18, and that section falls into four clear subsections, which we need to follow to get the theme and the burden of this particular psalm. You have verses 1 to 6, then you have 7 to 10, 11 to 14, and 15 to 18. And as we go through these sections, we're going on a journey with the people of God who are going on a journey with God. Let me show you that. First of all, verses 1 to 6. The people of God strike camp to go on this great journey. And they exclaim and declare some of the great principles about God's character and actions on their behalf. Verse 1 is a direct reference to the cry of the collective people of Israel as they left Sinai and began their journey through the wilderness. And you can find that in Numbers chapter 10. And every time they camped, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for longer, when they set out again on their journey, again, Numbers 10, Psalm 68 verse 1 is what they cried as they declare their confidence in God to scatter their enemies before them. But there's another picture of God here. He's not only the God who is strong against his enemies, he's a God who is compassionate to those who are weak and vulnerable. Look at verse 5. He's the father of the fatherless and the protector of widows. Verse 6. He settles the solitary, the lonely in a home and leads out the prisoners to prosperity. We need to remind ourselves that the God of war is also a God of great compassion and tenderness. And then, as it were, the journey begins, really from verse 7. This is the people of God at Sinai and setting out. And God revealed himself, you remember from Exodus, at Sinai by the giving of the law. And there were the great dramatic, physical manifestations of God, referred to here as the earth quaked, for example. And in prophetic and poetic language, that David speaks here about God manifesting himself to his people. And then all through the years of the wilderness, he rained in abundance on the people of God. He rained manna, he rained quail. Everything they had need of was given them from above. And then verses 11 to 14, here the people settle in and conquer the promised land. And verse 14, before the Almighty, the kings are scattered. Again, picturesque language, but that's what these verses are about. God giving his people their promised inheritance. And then the journey comes to a culmination in Jerusalem, verses 15 to 18. And I think the setting here is very clearly the bringing by David of the Ark of the Covenant into the tabernacle in Jerusalem. Look at the end of verse 17. The Lord is among them. Sinai is now in the sanctuary. We've come the full journey from God at Sinai to God now in Jerusalem. And the world around looks on. Look at verse 15. O mountains of God, the many-peaked mountains of Bashan, mountains which are taller, greater than Mount Zion. Look with hatred on the relatively small mountain that God has elevated in importance and significance. But God is now, as it were, taken up residence in Jerusalem among his people, that he set apart for himself and constituted as a nation at Mount Sinai. There's one more wonderful thing about this half of the psalm I want you to notice. It's in verse 18. And it probably sounds familiar to you because Paul draws on this verse in Ephesians 4 when he speaks about God giving ministries of gifts to his church. Here in the Old Testament, it's a picture of Yahweh coming all conquering into Jerusalem and laden down with the spoils of his victories. And then Paul takes that and he applies it to Jesus, who enters heaven, as it were, at his ascension, all conquering following his victory on Calvary, and shares the spoils of his victory with his church for their future growth and maturity. It's a dramatic, wonderful, powerful psalm. And we'll look at the second half of it, God willing, in our next study. And until then, the Lord bless you and the Lord keep you.